Today's episode of the Tavern Chat podcast is brought to you in part by Flipboard. Flipboard is one of those apps that you don't realize you're using it as much as you are until you don't have it. My prior phone, which was a Google Pixel, had it pre-installed. I used it constantly. It was a great place to catch current events, stories of interest, just fun stuff, all in one place. And I changed to an iPhone, and it took me a while to figure out that I was missing something, and what I was missing was Flipboard. So, if you don't have it installed on your phone or tablet, go to flipboard.com and correct that now. Hello, and welcome to the Tavern Chat podcast. I'm your host, Eric Tenkar, your bartender in the OSR, your main proprietor at the Tenkar's Tavern blog. This is another episode in our Designers and Makers series of interviews, and today we have none other than Douglas Cole from Gaming Ballistic. Doug.
Well, thank you for having me, Eric. Good to be on the show.
You're very welcome. Just an inside note, we were having technical difficulties, so hopefully this goes better than earlier did. Of course, now I'm having dog difficulties in the background. It'll never cease. So, Doug, what I am going to do is ask you a series of questions, and after that, we're going to pretty much hex crawl and go where our feet take us. So, if you're ready, I will give you your first question.
I am ready.
All right. Tell us about your first RPG experience.
My first RPG experience was probably 1981 or so, when my friend Howard introduced me to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. And then soon after, I asked for books for Christmas. I got the red and blue box with Keep on the Borderlands and Isle of Dread, and basically been gaming ever since, one way or another.
Yeah, AD&D was my intro, and probably around the same time, 80 or 81. I'd have to really figure that math out myself. Okay, cool. So, what is your go-to RPG system?
Right now, I am playing a lot of GURPS and Powered by GURPS. I've been playing GURPS since 1989 and writing for Steve Jackson Games, either for the Pyramid magazine, which its last issue came out today, or for myself under Gaming Ballistic under license since 2002. And so that's the system that I've been playing the most consistently and for the longest.
Well, I had no idea that Pyramid was going under. I remember subscribing to that, and well, I used to get it in physical format, and then when it went digital, that was one of my earlier gaming reads when I came back to the hobby.
Yep, today was issue 122, last one.
Wow. All right. That sucks. Now I'm depressed.
Well, we'll see if we can cheer you up over time.
Okay. Next question. Race as class, yay or nay?
I think it has its merits. It's the dwarves and elves and etc. of a lot of the fundamental literature had their own thing going. Elves were always magical and whimsical and a bit of a type, and dwarves were, strong and virtuous and steadfast and whatever. And as such, the blend of race and class didn't really show up. So races class seems to have a good underpinning in the source material. I think as you branch out later in time, you see a lot more variety, and that's where I think people got to, I don't want to always play the magical elf. I want to play the fighty elf or the sorceress dwarf. And there are references to spells and stuff in Tolkien. They cast something over the Troll Lord horde so that people can't find it. So, I don't get all complainy when it's not there, but I see the merits of it.
Okay, fair enough. Where do you stand on Save or Die? Not the podcast.
I like it. I think that there's a place for it, and as I found out myself a couple of years ago when I got caught in an explosion, sometimes you do stupid stuff and you save or die, and that's it. And the other thing about it is it makes one approach a game with a certain amount of caution that save or you take a couple hit points or save or you're discomfited just doesn't do.
Yeah, that point's been brought up by others, and that it's a valid point. I guess that all or die consequence makes you a bit more cautious.
It does. Now, if I could put in a gratuitous plug at this point, we'll get into it later. But one of the reasons why you would want to invoke a save or die mechanic is to bypass the ablative nature of hit points, right? Where either you're going to have a trap that's really dangerous to anyone who trips it, and so you're going to need to do 10d10 or 10d12 or 10d lots damage, or you need something that represents just getting a smackdown laid on you. You're poisoned, and so you're wobbling around nauseous, or you're wounded badly, and it doesn't matter how many hit points you have, which, as we've discussed before, can represent a lot of things. The Dragon Heresy role-playing game, my own take on 5th edition, instead of save or die, what you wind up doing is if you fail your saving throw, you take direct to wounds, and you don't have many. And that brings on conditions and impairment, and it's a terrible thing. And so that gives you a way to bring on some pretty significant impairment without necessarily being poof, you're dead.
That's a different, yeah. When I think of the ablative hit points, I think of Traveler and how their armor was pretty much like that. But when you took damage right to your ability scores. It was an interesting way to handle it. All right. Well, we got one last question, and then we will become some free-range chickens and go where we shall. What would the teenage you think if they could see what you would accomplish in a hobby by this point in your life?
Honestly, teenage me would probably be pretty impressed, right? At this point in my publishing career, I've published 4 books. I've got probably between 3 and 6, depending on how I do it, that are going to be coming out in 2019. Written over a dozen articles for Pyramid Magazine and a book for Steve Jackson Games. Relatively speaking, I think we probably all thought we had it in us, and you see that all over. The do-it-yourself nature of publishing now is it's probably as big as it was in the early days of the hobby, if not bigger. I mean, there were fewer people playing back then, but everyone had to do yourself because what could you do? Either you had the surplus money to go buy all the stuff, or you didn't, in which case you were making things up. Now we're still making things up, but the tools to get it professionally published or unprofessionally published, depending on your goals, are legion. And so, I don't know that I would have ever thought that I would have a hobby business in the gaming industry, but I do. So I think that teenage me would think it would be pretty cool.
Yeah, I think the teenage me will look at me and just be like, "What? Podcast blogging? What?" Yeah, print on demand, all the stuff that, or even PDFs.
Right.
Who would have thought? All right, so now we go off the rails. Now we go off where we want to go, Doug. And just to put things in perspective for people, I've known Doug for a number of years. We used to game together a Friday night or so every month with the infamous B team.
All hail the 5%. All hail the 10% slope.
Yes. And Joe, if you're listening, I'm sure we'll bring this up when I interview you. I'm sure it's okay. It's like an inside joke now with Joe Block. But when I, first met you, and we were running Swords and Wizardry, or I was running Swords and Wizardry. Uh, you came into the group, and you were definitely rooted in GURPS. I mean that I've always I've always liked GURPS, especially for the source books. The research in them is amazing, and a lot of these source books are almost system neutral in the information that you can uh, hijack from them for other game systems. It's really great, and my experience with GURPS goes back to the Man to Man and Orc Slayer. I actually own those. I bought them when they came out.
I played Orc Slayer. I was in a gaming group here in Minneapolis, and that was one of the few games my wife played with me, and we played through Orc Slayer.
Really?
Yeah.
Never got a chance to run it. I ran some GURPS back in my teenage days, but then again, I ran everything back then. I was very good at picking up new systems. Now, older me is very limited in my ability to learn anything distinctly new. But you, Doug, you seem to have a very good grasp of different systems between GURPS. I know you know the OSR pretty well, and you've taken 5e and made it into your own. So tell us about that.
So let me start because this is an OSR house. One of the things that I really liked about getting back to the basic D&D through the Swords and Wizardry was, and I even wrote a blog post about this. I called it 8 Little Combats All in a Row. And one of the things that just was neat about old school Rules Light is that everything was the way that you wanted to do it. And just to describe it, Peter Del Orto was another character in B Team, or player in B Team who had his character, and he and I were both the same level fighter, but we played our characters very differently, and it didn't matter what the stats were. It didn't matter. A lot of things didn't matter. We played our characters differently, and none of it was on the sheet. And you could go through and fight 8 little short, sharp combats in a dungeon crawl. And we would only play for 2 hours or so, right?
Yep.
I mean, so it was
2.5, and bullshit within it. So
right, exactly. So you just go boom, 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 and 8 complete fights beginning to end, and you started them, and there was danger, and you finished them, and then you moved on. You got your 12 copper pieces, and you moved on, and that was really cool. And it really made me realize how effective a minimal rule set can be in helping shape the story, but not driving it mechanically. And that was really the beginning of me really taking a look at how I was writing things. Because in the GURPS world, the stuff that I'm most famous for are things like, The Deadly Spring, or what was my other, The Last Gasp, which was, a fairly complicated treatise on, the first one was on bows and arrows, and the next one was on using fatigue in a new way. Both of which were really cool. And yet, The Last Gasp especially is harder to use just because it's more bookkeeping. And since then, I've really started to embrace the rules of quick, effective play. Don't invent new mechanics if an old mechanic will do. Don't make people consult something when a rule of thumb will get you 90% of the way there. Table lookups are great. Lots of table lookups repetitively in play make the game drag. Stuff like that. Now, there's nothing wrong with a table that you consult as part of world building, or if you only refer to it now and then, or if it's quick. But if you're constantly flipping game master to player to this to that, whatever, that's probably something that one wants to avoid. And that really started to show up in my writing as we played, and as I immerse myself in different systems and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, when I was younger, we enjoyed MERP and Rollmaster. But we used to call it Table Master because you couldn't play the game without flipping through the book and going to the combat critical charts to figure out what happened.
And they were awesome. They were some of the part of the reason why you could deal with that is that the answers were so much fun.
Right. They were definitely, and they were entertaining.
Right.
You know, your death, if it happened, could certainly make everybody laugh and smile. Now,
right.
It's a game like that, I think, an interface like Fantasy Grounds, where all that could be automated,
yes,
is awesome. When I came back to gaming, playing Dark Heresy on Fantasy Grounds 2 as a player, and having those charts built in, it played so much faster than any of the games that relied upon charts. And even, Warhammer, Fantasy Roleplay relies upon charts. You can't game without it. Whereas most of those are games you can kind of, once you know your combat rolls, what you need to hit, really what you need to look up.
Right. And that is one of the good things that 5th edition, I think, took from the OSR is when I've played Dragon Heresy and when I've played in 5th edition, I don't remember a lot of charts. They've streamlined the mechanics down fairly well. I love the fact that in most cases you can just assign advantage or disadvantage to a roll and move on. That's a very good mechanic.
Yep.
to not have to worry about, oh, did I forget a +1 here or there?
Yeah, it's strange. Something as simple as THAC0 changed the way we gamed at the table because it made having to reference the DMG for every attack roll unnecessary, and that speeded up play in and of itself.
Yep. Never stop play if you don't have to. So that's one of the things that I'm exploring a little bit in my writing. I'm writing another adventure, not the one that's in Kickstarter now, and the Dragon Heresy system tries to do as much as it can with existing mechanics. And we'll probably talk about grappling eventually, and that was one of the cases where I said, why does it have to be complicated? Why can't it just be the same way you handle everything else in order to resolve a grappling attack? And even Hobbes saw its merit. He uses a different version of it, but once you realize that certain subsystems don't have to be as complicated as they are, the game gets better.
Well, I remember playing in the 1E days, and the moment somebody wanted to do unarmed combat or grapple or overbear, as a GM, I was like, all right, we got to take 30 because I got to reread these rules.
Right. Somebody ordered the pizza, and by the time it gets here,
maybe I'll be able to run this. And of course, psionics fell underneath that too. All these different subsystems within AD&D 1E, which for the most part, most groups just hand wave them away. They were. They didn't mesh well with the underlying system for the most part. Now, you with your grappling rules, dungeon grappling, you actually presented rules that are usable with pretty much any version of D&D or D20 powered games, and it works smoothly.
Yeah,
makes sense.
Yep, and in a very real way, the simpler it is, the better. So ultimately, I've done a lot of. I'm not a big guy. I'm maybe 5'8" on a good day, but I've done a lot of martial arts. I've done weapon stuff. I've done grappling stuff. I've done kicky punchy stuff. And the thing that I've realized through all of that is that the more that you study, the more that they all reflect each other. And if you look at the old manuals, you grapple with their weapons, and when you're using a shield, you're actually, in a lot of cases, when you're doing skirmish style use of a shield, you're manipulating the other person's weapons and their own shield with yours. And all of that aside, basically what I want to do is use what's there. And if you can take all the complexities of sword play and fencing and axe work and footwork and all that stuff and say, yeah, I'm cool with rolling 1d20 plus a bonus against an armor class. There's no reason whatsoever that you can't use the same level of abstraction for grappling. And way back when I was like, it was, doing GURPS, I'm like, why can't we roll damage for grappling? Wouldn't that be fun, instead of grappled, not grappled, to have an effect roll? And that was where GURPS Technical Grappling came from. But I wrote it. It was a good idea, badly presented.
Okay.
It was presented not in a way. Once you read through it a few times, you'd be like, oh, this actually isn't hard. Doug just made it hard. But it was, my first full book, and I presented it in a certain way, and I've learned since then. I have grown. But then when it came time, and frankly, after spending time with you and Peter and the B team, I was like, I think that we can apply this to OSR. And that forced me to write to the level of the rules, which strip away all the complexity that are too easy to reach for in a system that grew by accretion like GURPS did. And so I said, okay, what do I need? We've got an armor class. We'll use it. We've got hit points. Okay, we can sort of use them. But yeah, roll to hit, and if you hit, roll damage. And we'll call that damage control. And if you get enough control to overwhelm somebody's strength, you've pinned them or restrained them or whatever, right? The bad things happen. And well, what is that? If you have control, well, someone is going to immediately say, well, I don't want that. Can I break that control? Sure, roll to hit. Roll damage. And you can either grapple the guy back, or you can break his hold. And well, I've got this control. Well, can I break his arm? Well, you've rolled damage. So why don't we just treat that roll on the same scale as weapon damage? And, if you have a fighter, maybe you've got a D8 or a D10 hit die, depending on what edition you're playing. If you're a mage, maybe you've got a D4. And so the mages are going to, well, let's use the hit dice. Because people who should know about grappling tend to have bigger hit dice than people who are going to be like, I'm going to grapple you with my textbook because, I've got my spell book or whatever, right? I'm going to book you to death. And so it naturally led itself to, what's your damage? Well, it's your hit die. And since weapons and hit dice are kind of on the same scale, it worked really well. Anyway, to make a long story less long, using control as a damage type allows you to freely trade it for injury. Like, oh, you make a hit roll, and then you've got, let's say you've built up 15 control points or something. You're like, all right, I'm going to spend 12 of them and do 3d4 damage to direct to somebody's hit points, right? So you can build up this huge amount and restrain them and then break a neck, or you say, oh, well, I'm going to throw them down onto the ground and make an attack roll, and if you're above a certain title, you can do it. So it opens up a lot of things, but it's a simple enough core mechanic that a player can say, like, I was playing this at Gen Con. I was doing a grappling simulation in Dungeon Grappling with 5th edition. And someone's like, well, I want to grapple him with my shield, or I want to grapple him with my axe, or, he's doing this, so can I do this? I'm like, that sounds awesome. We'll go by the rule of awesome. Let's do it. And it was a simple enough mechanic that everyone could relate, and you didn't get lost. Oh, I don't know the rules, so I can't improvise. So that's the core bit of what I'm trying to do with the grappling mechanic, and hopefully many other things as well, is make it so that once you've learned how to hit somebody with a sword, you also know how to grapple. And it's all related.
Well, honestly, your rules made me believe that you could do unarmed combat in a D&D type rule set and actually have it be fun. So
yep, and I think the more people, it was cool, and thank you for the compliment. I think the more people play with them, the more that people will realize that that unarmed combat can be fun. And useful and all that good stuff. The flip side of that is it allows a game master to truly punish the murder hobo mentality.
Oh yeah.
Because if you get into a fight in a bar and it's fisticuffs and wrestling, most people are going to be cool with that. If you start, well, I'm just going to bring out the sword and start swinging it around, and even if it's quote unquote non-lethal damage, if you're drawing weapons, the town watch is going to show up and beat the holy bejesus out of you, and you're going to deserve it.
Yep.
But giving a viable way to make a fun conflict resolution that doesn't involve blood and death opens up a lot of story possibilities as well.
No, it really, it's one of those additions to the OSR library that I think should be in pretty much every GM's backpack.
I agree. And the best way to do that is definitely to go to the Dragon Heresy book, because it's a bigger book. No, I'm just teasing. The Dungeon Grappling is on. I'm teasing because that's my big core rules, and you don't need it. Dungeon Grappling is what, $7.50 PDF, $15 hard copy. It's a good looking book, and it's on sale until after the new year, so it's a good time to pick it up.
And Dragon Heresy is a beautiful book. The quality of the actual print book is awesome. So
it surprised me.
Well,
right? I still have the fold and gather samples, which are the printed. They print out these pages and then they fold them up, but they don't staple them and they don't put them together. And the printer sends them to you, and you look through them, and I'm like, okay, these look good. I'm gonna like this book, and then you get it in the final copy. And you see how the sewn binding really holds it together, and you feel the weight of it. And yeah, you paid a few more hundreds of dollars to upgrade the cardboard from 2 or 2.5 millimeters to 3 millimeters, and whatever, right? I want the round back because I just like the way it looks, and you spend money and whatever, and then you get it. And I was holding this thing in my hand for the first time, and it wasn't quite like holding my children, because close. That would be wrong. But it was wild to see how it came together, and I can hold this thing in my hands and really appreciate the quality that the printer did in putting it together. And it's a pretty book.
Yeah.
And it does things, and just a little bit. The Dragon Heresy game is like 5th edition, but it's got the old school level of risk in it, because it has that separate injury track. And a couple other mechanics modifications, you can really get yourself, even at very high level, in deep, deep trouble very quickly from an injury perspective.
And that's cool. And I've frequently said that, 5e, it's a good system, but there's more there than I want to have to spend time learning.
Yep.
And I like that, with Dragon Heresy, I can kind of get a 5e that's, I don't want to say stripped down, but certainly more digestible. At least to me.
Yeah, no, it's and there's a lot that's there. There's a lot that's a little bit different. It is recognizably 5th edition, but it's also focused at the moment on level 1 through 5. As hopefully as more products come out and as people hopefully start to buy the game, and it actually should show up on retail shelves. I'll hopefully see the first orders from distribution this month. But as people hopefully start to buy the game and play it and tell people, and maybe some more revenue will come in, and I'll be able to either kickstart or self-fund a character expansion. That is one of the things that I'm looking at in the second half of 2019. Is, can I do a character expansion, and instead of just level 1 through 5, look at like maybe level 6 through 13. But that's one of the things that I had to do in order to make the book that you generously backed and that people have affordable. Is I basically had to focus on those beginning levels. But a lot of people like playing that. Level 3, 4, and 5 is and maybe through is a real sweet spot for good, playable, fun characters that are nonetheless still vulnerable. I think that my system of wounds and vigor, it's not unique to me, right? It's been co-developed. I came up with it on my own, but then it's like, oh, that's in Pathfinder. Oh, look, yes, it is, tucked in the back. That was Wounds and Vitality, although I do it a little bit differently because you don't have to get rid of Vitality to jump to Wounds. You can just get hit real bad or fail a saving throw. But anyway, long story less long is I have a lot more that I can do with it. But, it is a big, pretty book, and big, pretty books are $100 to $150 a page just to get the PDF.
Oh, I'm sure. And it's going to look like it's just like the recent Frog God releases. It'll look competitive sitting on a shelf next to any of the Woods of the Coast releases or the Paizo releases. It's you have that quality, and that's it would look proper on a shelf next to I don't know. I know they're all on sale on Amazon, but whatever the latest 5e release is, it would look fine.
Yeah, no, it would. And one of the things that I'm trying to do right now, and I've got an adventure in Kickstarter to convert and print to the Dragon Heresy system. One of the things I am trying to do is have it not be alone, right? So the first adventure I ever published was a convention-style one-shot called Lost Hall of Tyr. 64 pages. It was my second book. It came after Dungeon Grappling, so I had learned a bunch about layout. And I hired Todd Crapper, yes, that is his real name, at Broken Ruler Games to do my layout, and he did a great job. And it was not a financial success. I lost a bit of money because I overspent on art, which I have a tendency to do. But it was a cool adventure, and I talked to Steve Jackson Games and said, hey, how about I convert this to the Dungeon Fantasy role-playing game? And they said, sure. And I blew it out to 128 pages. So, increased the size by 75%, added 20 pages of setting material, mostly the town that you start from, because Sean Punch had written and published the Dungeon Fantasy supplement Tavern Town, which was basically the whole thing was just a detailed location. And it really was cool because it gave you all the details that you need to come to an adventure location that was built for adventure and then go out from there. And I thought that was really neat. And then what I wanted to do after I fulfilled, so I turned it into a Dungeon Fantasy role-playing game, and that was Hall of Judgment. And that was my best Kickstarter ever.
Really?
Dragon Heresy had about 325 backers. It made about $16,000 on the Kickstarter phase, and then a few thousand more on the backer kit phase. Okay. But 3,000 of that were people buying the Viking shields that I make at $500 a piece. So really, it made about $13,000 with $3,000 of shields. The Hall of Judgment supplement had 525 or 528 backers.
Wow.
Native to the Kickstarter, and where it raised just shy of 16,000 purely with role-playing game stuff.
Right.
It was all right. So that was the largest number of backers and the most money that I had brought in. And I took Lost Hall and just made it better. And the only thing that I regret was that I was not able to upgrade the basic combat maps, which are sort of stock Photoshop art, in that book, because the whole focus was keep the cost down to show Steve Jackson Games that I could do it. I wouldn't lose money. I would bring it in and be on time and on budget and make a good book to support their game. And all of that happened.
Okay.
Right. It's my most successful product to date. And it's probably sold about 600 copies total, which is nice. I've gotten, and I had actually in November, we actually had the most hardcover and PDF sales through Warehouse 23, plus my plus my website since the Kickstarter. So November was a great month for Hall of Judgment.
Nice.
And I wanted to bring that quality to the Dragon Heresy game. So now I'm converting it back to a 112-page Dragon Heresy native book. The first goal was to upgrade the maps, and we funded, and so the maps are going to get upgraded by Glenn Seal, who was the guy who did my supplemental maps for Hall of Judgment. He's also
otherwise known as Monkey Blood, and he has
Monkey Blood. Yeah, that's right. And gold ENnie for cartography in 2018, deservedly so. So he's agreed.
This is your current Kickstarter, correct?
It is. It's running right now. It ends this Sunday.
Oh.
Yeah. So we're tight up against it. We funded, but right now we are about $1,000, which is maybe like 35 people if you go print plus PDF. So we're like $1,000 short of me being able to go to the United Kingdom and print with the same quality as Hall of Judgment, which the 600 people who have bought it will say that's a good book. It's a pretty book. Right. I got a proof copy from them for something else, and I'll be able to do print on demand to serve the international market, and more large scale printing to serve the U.S. But it's a good option, and it's going to be a pretty book at $6,000, which is not crazy, but it's given where we are now, it's going to be a lot of people have to come in the next couple of days. At $6,000, I'll go to the same company that printed Dragon Heresy for me and get a lay flat softcover with 105-pound paper that'll be really luscious. So it'll lay flat on the table, and that'll be the cover. And then if it goes nuts, or if I decide that I'm just going to write the damn check, it'll be a hardback with the same, a little bit thinner cover, because it's only 112 pages. So I don't want half the book to be cover, right? But I would love to have a hardcover release to go buy Dragon Heresy, get Lost Hall of Tyr 2nd edition, and play. And everyone that I've talked to, and I've run Hall of Judgment, which is basically exactly how Lost Hall 2nd edition would run at Gamehole Con, where we met in person for the first time. And it's a good adventure. It's a good setting. And I am in the process of either writing or having contracted to write 3 more in that world for both the Dungeon Fantasy role-playing game and eventually Dragon Heresy in 2019. So a lot more is coming. But obviously the more people who get it and play it and talk about it, it becomes, it's the network effect. And so that's kind of where we are right now.
All right. Well, I am going to include a link to the Kickstarter in the show notes.
Yay!
Yay! But so if they're going to Kickstarter, what is it they actually have to search for? Is it Lost Hall of Tyr?
Lost Hall of Tyr would do it. Okay. Yeah. So if I were to log out and go into Kickstarter and search for Lost Hall, it comes up first.
Okay.
Actually, if you do Lost Hall, you will see all 3 of my books.
You are right.
Take the top one.
Okay, I'll put those. I'll put those in the show notes, folks. That's Lost Hall of Tyr,
2nd edition.
It says maps and print run.
Yep.
So, well, Doug, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you for having me.
This is and it's funny because the average episode of the Tavern Chat podcast is around 15 minutes. I haven't had an interview that's gone shorter than 32. I think just because everybody I've spoken to, it's the hobby. We love talking about stuff that we love, and the conversation just flows because, again, it's in our blood. So really, I'm very thankful that you were able to pop in, and I'll get this up tonight. So
yeah, deeply appreciated. And yes, it's a shameless plug, but it's a very good little mini setting. Yeah, even if I say so myself, there's a lot there to grab on and run with. And it's been a lot of fun to run, and I'm really looking forward to adding the kind of production values that make you kind of sit there and stroke the book like a cat.
I'll do it with my cat right now. She's back in her nest, not trying to climb all over my desk. Oh, well, again, Doug, thank you. Thank everybody who's listening. I appreciate it. My guests appreciate it. As always, stay safe, be well, God bless, roll those dice, and I will talk with you all tomorrow. Later, folks.